One thing that united many people of Parkin were the juke joints that brought liveliness to the town. They were the center of the action, the joy, and most of all, the music. Miss Faye Futch discusses her own experiences growing up in Parkin, Arkansas, and the center of the juke joints.
My name is Faye Futch, and I am the research assistant / historian for the University of Arkansas Archeological Survey. I grew up in Parkin, Arkansas, and the St. Francis River basically runs down the center of Parkin, Arkansas. I was fortunate enough to live in an area called the Bottoms. And when I say fortunate, because I experienced all of the great music and the juke joints in that area. And that is what my topic is about, basically the juke joints that existed here in Parkin. I lived on a street that had 10 juke joints. And the first one that I know about was owned by Mrs. Carrie Hudson. And it started on Front Street. She had came here from Mississippi, and she opened a joint. Well, after the sawmill opened in Parkin, Arkansas, a lot of African Americans started migrating here to work in the mill. So that she accommodated the weekends with entertainment there. And one of the most famous, well, he became famous later, was Muddy Waters. Muddy Waters lived on the Phillips Plantation north of Parkin, Arkansas, in a community called Togo. And he played in West Memphis, played what he called a chitlin circuit. And there were a lot of circuits surrounding this area on the farms where the entertainers would go and play on weekends to that's the only way they could survive and make money. But anyway, my father, after he got out of the Army, Mrs. Carrie Hudson would hire him to go to West Memphis to pick up Muddy Waters to come back and play in her joint here in Parkin, Arkansas. And he later went on to become a famous recording artist. I know that he recorded at Sun Studios in Memphis, and later he went on to Chicago and recorded for Chess Records until, I guess that was the last place that he recorded. But a lot of his records are still played today, and he has family that still lives out at Parkin and in Memphis. The Civil War and Reconstruction, then African Americans had to devise some type of way for entertainment. So the juke joints is one of the main things that they created. Now basically, African Americans had to try to find some place to live and work and whatever during that time. So a lot of them ended up as tenant farmers and living on farms, but they had to have entertainment on the weekend. So basically what the owner of the farmer plantation would do would let them have a house or some type of building for weekly entertainment, and they were called juke joints. Now, the juke word came over from Africa. That tradition was brought up with them, and it was kind of meant rambunctious and loud and vulgar and whatever. But that's the term that was used. But most of what went on in the juke joints was dancing, music, gambling, fighting, and it's just a lot of things as far as entertainment. You might say that fighting wasn't a form of entertainment, but a lot of times they got to fighting, about gambling. Somebody lost a crap game, dice game, or whatever. But there was a lot of bootleg liquor. And on weekends, that mostly started happening on Friday night and Saturday night through Sundays. But Sunday night at 12 o'clock, everything had to be cut off because everybody had to go back to work. J.B. Walker was another one. He owned a teenage club that he built for us. He was a deacon in our church, but he knew that we liked to party, so that's where we went. And at 10 o'clock on Sunday nights, we would start from Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday. 10 o'clock on Sunday nights, he would come to the door and tell us all good things must come to an end. And that's what he would say, all good things must come to an end. And so we knew what that meant. But we had the jukebox and the pinball machine, and his wife ran the restaurant part and bar. She would sell us hamburgers and hot dogs and drinks and like that. But it was just a unique experience I wish that everybody could experience. I would end up at Babe Mason's place before it was over. At Babe Mason, he came from out of Twist. He had a juke joint out there at Twist on number 7. And he came into town, this Mayor Blackman, was already, she owned a brothel too. And she owned a a juke joint right next to it. But she and Babe Mason went into business together. And at some point, he bought her out. And so he was still running a joint at Twist, and he was running the one at Parkin also. But eventually he closed one down at Twist and moved his family to Parkin. And like I said, it was a two-story one too, like I said previously. And it was just a jumping place. And occasionally he would have people from Memphis to come and show movies on a Sunday night. And he would always have a band. The jukeboxes were real popular. These jukeboxes that they owned, the man would come in that owned them. He would come in on every Monday morning, and a cigarette man. And they would come in and they would open the machines, and they would divide the money with the owner. And they made a lot of money that way. It was the same way with the cigarette machines. That person would come in, whoever owned the cigarette machines, they would come in and they would divide the money and they would get ready for the next week. So they made a lot of money that way. And everybody sold food. And I had the opportunity to work for my mother one time. She worked for Marion and Sherman Downs that owned the Blue Lagoon there in Parkin. And she broke her leg, so I worked in her place. And I just fried so much chicken, I thought I would never. But anyway, the chickens basically consisted of 2 pieces of white bread with Miracle Whip, lettuce, tomato, and 2 pieces of chicken. And then I would have some gamblers that would leave the crab house and come there, and they would sit there, and I had to fry them a whole half chicken, and they would sit there and eat it until they got full and drank full of beer and everything, and then they would go back to the crab house. I had 2 of them that did that. I hated to see them coming because they would sit there and they would eat our fried chicken, and they would eat and eat. But chicken and pork chops and fish were the main delicacies, sandwiches that they would serve, and lots of bootleg beer. The Parkin police also came down to get their cut on a Saturday night or a Sunday night for letting them bootleg. A lot of things went on in Parkin, Arkansas, in the joint area, that district. And the place was originally named after Isaac R. Dye. It was called Dye's Bottom. And it was a white gentleman that had built a 2-story grocery store up on the corner just as you enter the bottoms. And he began to sell different portions of land, and that's why they called it Dye's Bottom. Another one of the famous juke joints was owned by Babe Mason. And this is a picture of one of his place. Babe Mason lived at Twist, Arkansas. And Twist, Arkansas was known for its famous juke joint. People come from miles around and out of the rural areas to visit it on weekends. And at Twist, Arkansas, at Babe Mason's place is where you heard of the famous fire where B.B. King had to go back in the juke joint and get his guitar.
What happened is B.B. King was playing at this random juke joint, and some people, his story, Mr. King's story, was some people got into a fight over a woman named Lucille. When they used to have these oil lamps for light, and so when that knocked over, it was, the oil would be on fire on the ground, and then everything, it's just a wooden building, started going up. And there's dozens of people in here dancing and stuff, and they're trying to get out the windows. People lost their lives. And anyway, he gets outside and he goes, "My guitar!" And he goes running back in there to grab this guitar. He got burned, but he gets his guitar, and he said he named his guitar Lucille. So after that day, Mr. King had 9, 10, 11 different Lucilles. Every time he got a new guitar, it was like Lucille 3, Lucille 4. And he said he named that guitar Lucille to remind him how much trouble a woman can get you into. But what he didn't say in his official story is that he was the one messing with Lucille, who was married, and Lucille's husband started the fight with Mr. King.
Well, anyway, that actually happened. But Muddy Waters played up there, and B.B. King played there. There was another famous club also across the street that was run by Mr. Jerry Walker. He owned the juke joint, and in addition to the juke joint, he had what he called the goat house. It was a one-room structure that sit high on some bricks. But then next door to his juke joint, he had what you call the goat house. And the goat house was just a big tent where someone used to own goats, but that's where they gambled. That's where they had all the big crap games out there. But all of the juke joints had crap houses. That was one of the main things that they did. And as we grew older, we would sit out on the porch and listen to all of the music. And there was one particular man, Mr. Jerry Walker, he would play the blues all night long. I mean, even when you were asleep, he would stay open all night, and he just enjoyed it. And the famous song that he played was 3 o'clock in the morning by B.B. King. I never will forget it. And this is a copy of the juke joint that was at Hicks Station that was owned by Kate Malone and his family. That was very popular also. And this was the last of the famous juke joints that I call here. It was located at Mound City Road. And fortunately, a couple of years ago, I went out to take pictures of this in search of juke joints because a friend of mine, Cindy Grisham, and I used to be in search of all the juke joints in this area that I remember. And now it is owned by about Wilson's. Went up to Wilson, Arkansas. They have changed all of that. This place doesn't look the same. It's a beautiful event center now. But they have done wonders up there with it. But I was glad I got a chance to go up and take pictures of the last famous joint that was operating in Crittenden County during that time. And that owned a liquor store here in Parkin. And those that bootleg, except Babe Mason now. Babe Mason did his own thing. They sold liquor for him. And there were 2 women that owned juke joints too, and they sold liquor for him also. Now occasionally they would be busted by the sheriff. That periodically he had to do his job. So one night in particular, Mrs. Ethel Broadneck, she lived next door to us, and her grandson that worked, well, she worked him, I'll say it like that. He was the one responsible for carrying out all the bottles and the cans and the liquor stuff. But one particular night, the sheriff raided the house, and he gathered all the stuff and threw it under our house, which was next door. And he found it under our house the next morning. But anyway, like I said, everything went on. There was another house that's owned by Miss Almeida. She owned a 2-story juke joint that had a brothel upstairs, and she also had a crab house right next door. And it was ran by Mr. Jim Bobcat. So he handled all the gambling there. But it was just a district comparable to Beale Street. As a matter of fact, the street that I lived on, that was back of where I grew up, was originally called Beale Street. But I researched and I found out that Beale Street in Memphis was older than our Beale Street. But I looked at the 1930 census for Jerry Walker, and he actually lived on Beale Street, which was directly behind our house. So we had a Beale Street in Parkin. And I guess they tried to live up to that name, but it was a lot of shooting and cutting and fighting, and my sisters and I, we experienced a lot of things that went on, but we enjoyed the music most of all. We started preparing ourselves on Friday evenings, and we could hear that music, and we started getting ready to go. They also had live bands, and occasionally we would have live bands in Parkin, especially Babe Mason. Babe Mason had a 2-story juke joint. Upstairs, he had a brothel, and we had a big dance floor, and we would just dance all night, just dance, dance, dance. And occasionally, he would have a live band to come in from Memphis to play for us. And that's one of the things the young people now, they really haven't experienced with live bands. They have what they call DJs now, but we actually had live bands down in the bottoms. And most of the joints that was on the out on the highways and on the farms. I enjoyed the juke joints because I just wouldn't take nothing for that experience, because dancing is what I love, what my sisters and I love, my mother loved, and she would always come back and teach us before we got big enough to go out. Then she would always come in and teach us what the latest dance would be. My mother was a great dancer, and her brother was too. And we thoroughly enjoyed that. I think they started fading out in the early 80s. And in 1985, my brother was murdered well, it was outside of the joint. But anyway, at that time, my father began a campaign to shut the last juke joint down. And it didn't close up right away, but it did happen. Now, with the juke joints, there were a lot of clubs that existed. there was, they had a males club, and then my mother's club was the women's club. And they would have big Christmas parties, say perhaps they would wear red dresses, and they had what they call Blue Monday parties, where if it would rain, then the people that worked on the farm, they would come in to the bottoms and spend the day there and drink beer and whatever. And they would have card parties. They all had card parties. But the Blue Monday parties were really, really good too. Everybody came in. But when the sun was shining, then they'd have to go back to work the next day.
The St. Francis River has made life possible in the Arkansas Delta area for hundreds of years. The community has thrived and survived based on the river's current and the quality of soil produced by the silt of the river. The earliest of the inhabitants that we have record of is the Caskey tribe. The Caskey tribe was named for its chieftain Caskey, who ruled the tribe. During the time of DeSoto's visit, the tribe was at odds with a rival village, the Pikaha.
Hernando de Soto, who came to America in 1539, started his travel across the continent in Florida, weaved throughout the southeast, and most of the places he went over there are fairly well documented from archaeological evidence like trade goods that we know are from Europe that date to that time period, as well as things like place names that were named after the various Indian tribes and or geographical things. They made lots of maps and referred to different rivers and different kind of geographic anomalies that archaeologists and historians can go back now and find with ease. So most of the trek through the southeast until Mississippi is fairly well documented, but his foray into Arkansas, because of our rivers, is not as easy to find. So immediately before De Soto encountered the Mississippi River, in the kind of western part of Mississippi, he met with a tribe that historically would be the Chickasaw tribe. At that time, they were bands that were banded together that weren't all Chickasaw, but they became the Chickasaw. And for the first time in his foray into the Americas, he met massive resistance. Once before in Mobile, he did have a skirmish that he lost 20 men, but in this part of Mississippi, they knew he was coming, and unlike their eastern Indian counterparts, they were a much more warlike culture because of fighting for resources and things of that nature. So they were not willing, like their eastern counterparts, to trade and play nice with someone that wanted to come and take their women and their supplies. So several fights ensued. De Soto was caught completely off guard. They burned down the village he was staying in. He lost probably a third of his remaining men while he was in Mississippi. It was a major deal, and so he made haste to get out of there and to go west when he encountered the Mississippi River. De Soto nor anyone in his contingency had ever seen anything like the Mississippi. They refer to it being almost 3.5 miles wide right now at the Memphis Bridge, which he crossed, we think, a little bit south of Memphis when he crossed the river. But there at the Memphis River Bridge, it is about 2 miles across during flood stage now. That's because it hits a levee at West Memphis that stops it. No levees at the time, 3.5 miles across. They said in their in the De Soto Chronicles that if one of the gentlemen in their party was on the other side of the river, you couldn't even tell that they were human, much less male or female. It was so far away. When they saw that, they had a big issue. They had almost 400 men. They had several horses, hundreds of pigs, things they had to get across this river that was not only the biggest that they had ever seen, but, you know, it's one of the 3 biggest in the world. So it was a major deal. They weren't carrying boats with them everywhere because metal was super precious. So what they would do is they would encounter a river and then they would cut down trees and start making boats and then put the nails into the boats. And after they crossed, they would remove the nails, put them into their backpacks to keep for later. There were no foundries or anywhere to get metal in the Americas. The Indians were not even familiar with metal at that time. So it was a major deal. They started construction on their boats to get, you know, like I said, hundreds of people and animals across. And on the very first day, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they noticed a large group of Indian braves with red ochre paint on their face, as we would commonly refer to as war paint, coming at them down the Mississippi. They kind of stopped what they were doing and thought, these guys don't look so nice. What should we do? At that point, at 3 o'clock, the Indians opened fire with a barrage of arrows, hit several Spaniards. The Spaniards ran for their lives, ducked behind trees. The Indians came in hard and fast, attacked and left. And they were kind of confused, like, who are these guys? Why did they do that? Are they some of the guys that just tried to burn us down? You know, we're kind of nervous about the whole deal. What do we do? So they stopped building for the day, regrouped, started the next day, started to build boats day 2. When it became 3 o'clock, here come the Indians. This happened for 29 straight days. It got to where the entire contingency would just stop building boats about 2:45 because they knew they were coming, and they were like, we are so not getting blown up with arrows today, right? So they would go and hide. These guys would come and yell. They would shoot arrows. They would kill everyone they could, and then they left back on the Mississippi. Day 30, it's 3 o'clock. They know what that means, but they're finally finished with the boats. And yes, it took them a whole month because they had to make some really big boats, and this is a huge, deep, swift river. So, you know, there were a lot of concerns about safety. Anyway, day 30, they're done with these boats. Here come the Indians. No red paint, and they run to hide, and the Indians come all the way into shore, and they start hollering at them through their translator saying, hey, yeah, welcome to Arkansas. We're glad to have you. Feel free to cross right here. My chief, his name is Pakaha. He's interested in meeting you, told us we should make friends. Meanwhile, DeSoto was like, you killed a bunch of my guys. You know, this dude was my brother-in-law. He was a friend or whoever. You know, he's talking about him. He was like, we don't want to be friends with your chief, and we don't trust you at all. And they're like, yeah, well, you know, we were trying to keep you from coming, but now that we can see that your boats are done and you're coming anyway, we didn't stop you, we want to be friends. So DeSoto was kind of leery about this whole deal. He waited for them to leave, and they waited until the dark of the next morning to go ahead and make that crossing. So they crossed into Arkansas, somewhere south of Memphis. Probably got pushed downstream. It would have been north of Helena on the Arkansas side for sure, but south of Memphis. They land over there. They do make contact with some more of these guys who are loosely affiliated with the Pakaha tribe, who again invite them to come meet their chief. They're very friendly, but these are the guys who have shot at them for, you know, a straight month. So they're nice. They get out of there. They keep pushing west. They're like, we don't know what we're going to find, but we don't want to find these guys. They've run into another river. It's called the St. Francis River now. It was named by the French some 150 or so years later. So at that time, I'm not exactly sure what the name was of the St. Francis River, but DeSoto in his chronicles wrote how amazing it was. Again, he had walked all the way from Florida now to Arkansas, weaved up through, you know, into the Carolinas even. We're talking Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. Now he's into Arkansas. He said the St. Francis River was the most crystal clear sea to the bottom river he had ever seen in the Americas. It was beautiful. DeSoto wrote down through his scribes that it was just an immaculate river. That leads into our next story because it was so special, because it was, you know, the best in all of the Southeast, according to a guy who is making notes for his king and queen. There's no reason for him to lie about these things, because if the queen decides to come and put a lovely vacation home in Parkin, Arkansas, and it turns out that it's mud and mosquitoes, she would not be happy, and he would most likely be killed because of disease and other things like that. So he had no reason to lie about the natural resources. So we do take him for his word that it was just phenomenal. And the king and the tribe that occupied that area of the St. Francis was named Koski. Pakaha and his warriors did not tell DeSoto anything about Koski because they were complete mortal enemies. For multi-generations, they had been in a war against each other. We're not exactly sure how many years, because again, at that time, the Mississippian culture in Arkansas did not have written language. So we're very fortunate that this proto-historic period on the St. Francis River, that there is this glimpse from DeSoto. Ethnocentric as it may be, we can look at that and, you know, combine it with the archaeological evidence to come up with the story of, the probable story of how things were. So he met Koski, who again was the enemy of Pakaha. Koski met him about a mile out of town, had walked a long way there, brought his mom with him, because all the good kings are mama's boys. He also brought other women, his sisters. Today, we kind of look at that and think, well, that's bizarre, but they were a matrilineal society, which meant that your power only came through your mother. The only way to prove that a king was because his mother was a queen. Because before DNA testing, you can't prove who the father is. So it was always the queen's child and not the king's child. He also brought furs and things to trade and said, hey, we're happy to have you. I would love to have you come stay inside my village walls. DeSoto was again pretty wary after almost being burned alive in Mississippi after being shot at for a straight month by Pakaha. He didn't want to stay inside anybody's walls, but this king did seem to be a little bit different. He liked his age. Koski was probably in his mid-40s. His face was scarred from battle. He was very fierce looking. DeSoto, as a conquistador, appreciated that. His forays into South America had proven what a crazy good military leader he was, and pretty ruthless. He felt like this was someone that was very wise and that he could learn from. What we think is most likely is that Pakaha, who had many, many more warriors, after all of the problems that had happened during the DeSoto visit, just decimated them. And just like the United States did to Japan after World War II, or Germany, after you've beat someone that badly that's caused a lot of trouble, you make them disarm. And so at Parkin, what we find is that they pulled up their palisade wall and put it down. We do find that burials happened there for a generation or more afterwards, but no evidence at all that people still lived there. So they left. The French came through in the 15s, in the 16s. They found sparse settlements here and there. They didn't find any evidence of, large-scale population like there was at the time of DeSoto. And a few little settlements were here and there. And then it wasn't really until about the early 1900s that eastern Arkansas started to really be settled. A couple reasons for that. Those rivers that have been so good to us as far as making some of the most, if not the most fertile farmland in the world, hosting just crazy amounts of different wildlife and things that made living here good, also could make living here pretty hostile. 400 years after DeSoto visited Parkin, another group of investors came there looking for natural resources as well. The Northern Ohio Mill and Cooperage relocated from Northern Ohio. They had cut down all of the trees in Northern Ohio because that's what lumber mills do. And you're kind of out of work once you do that. So they had to go looking for acreage elsewhere and ended up buying a pretty large tract of land right there at Parkin. When they show up here, sight unseen, to come get all of the awesome hardwoods that we had to offer, they see all these Indian mounds. They don't really know what the deal is with them, but they're informed that, these are Indian mounds, and they're workers that they brought down from Ohio because Ohio does also belong to that same Mississippian culture. They were familiar with the concept, and they also were kind of superstitious where they didn't want to dig in the mounds. They didn't want to destroy the mounds. They just wanted to kind of act like they weren't there and kind of protect them in that they were going to ignore them. So it's a great blessing to us that the largely African-American workforce of the Northern Ohio Mill had that kind of attitude toward the culture from, again, almost 400 years before them, because if they had been otherwise minded, we wouldn't have these mounds and artifacts to see today. So they set up a mill, a very, very active mill all around the site, actually built their homes just right up to the mound. They had a road kind of going over the very base of it. And one of the little ladies that was born and raised there was a lady named Miss Rosie Patterson. Her dad worked for the mill. Her mother taught school. She grew up in a little bitty house there on the site. And as a child, she started seeing things that really concerned her. She would tell her mother and others that were close to her that she would see a man in her bedroom. Well, this freaked her daddy out, and he would check around and, get very protective. And of course, there was no one in the house, and he would ask her to describe this person. And she would always describe kind of a 18 to 20-year-old Native American man. There weren't any of those kinds of guys living in Parkin, so it was kind of confusing to him, and she kept on saying it. Not every night, but pretty regularly. And then before too long, she told some girlfriends at church. And well, it got out. The whole town said, Rosie thinks she sees ghosts. She's kind of... And, they knew she was a good girl. They grew up with her. Her parents were good people. They didn't say really bad things about her. It was more of an ongoing kind of joke that Miss Rosie thought she saw ghosts, but, it's Rosie. What are you going to do? Well, she lived in that house that, she was raised in up until the 1990s when the state of Arkansas acquired the mound and the surrounding village, and we're going to turn it into a state park. They decided it was really hard to talk to kids about Indians and mounds and things like this while they're looking at carports with little old men working on their lawnmowers. So the state of Arkansas started moving these homes off the site one by one, and or buying the people a new home in town. Miss Rosie was the last holdout. She didn't want to leave her home because that was where her parents had raised her. It was sentimental to her. And she told them, she said, you can move my existing house, but I don't want you to tear it down and to build me another one. I want my home. And they said, okay. So the very last home to be moved there at Parkin, off the site, was Miss Rosie's. The excavation equipment came in, and what we know from Arkansas earlier excavations and archaeologists that have been through is we don't have burial mounds per se in Arkansas like you've heard the term. Those are mostly east of us. Here in Arkansas, what we find is that people aren't buried in the mound unless they lived on top of it like the chief. People were buried under their house floors where they lived all out in the village. And again, I think I told you that Miss Rosie's house was built on top of the old Indian village. So when they went under her house to pick it up, they scraped under about 6 to 8 inches of dirt, no lower than that, because we never want to disturb any kind of burial. We always want to keep from doing that if at all possible. But when they did, and they lifted her house up, right under her bed, not 6 to 8 inches deep, was buried a warrior. 18 to 20-year-old warrior brave. He didn't have any kind of skeletal malformation, so we don't believe that he died in war. We believe it was a disease issue, that he just got sick, got a fever or something, and died. No evidence that his skeleton was hurt by warfare, but he was right under her bed. We know he's a warrior because he was buried with the most exclusive and elusive of all of the southeastern Mississippian culture artifacts, the head pot, which are only found in northeast Arkansas, southeast Missouri, and the extreme western side of Kentucky. A few over 100 ever found, and it was found there right under her bed. So we know that this gentleman was very important. Most likely was the chief's son or maybe a nephew that was in line to be a chief. Miss Rosie, who was watching the whole thing with interest because she didn't want them messing up her house, when she saw the skeleton right under her bed, she said, "I've been telling y'all for years. I've been saying it, and nobody believed me." Well, everyone believes her now. They moved her house to town, and for the rest of Miss Rosie's life, she said she never ever saw that gentleman again. DeSoto respected Koski, and Koski respected DeSoto on the war front, and they bonded immediately and started discussing, different things about being a leader and how to rule a society. So Koski explained to DeSoto that they had been in a multi-year drought, that most of their food stores were gone or dwindling. Some of the villages under his control, of which there were several, well over a dozen, were completely out of food. And as a leader, it was difficult for him to advise his people what to do, and he was really struggling with it. They had prayed, they had sent hunters out even further to try to find meat, but of course if it's not raining at home and your corn is foundering, the deer also don't have anything to eat and they're going to go elsewhere. So he was in a real dilemma. Once he started talking to DeSoto about these problems that were happening, DeSoto had priests with him on the trip. He had about 12, and they were very prominent because this was absolutely a Catholic mission. And even though the Spanish were looking for things like gold and resources that they could definitely bring back to Spain to increase her wealth, they were also looking to convert and to Christianize other societies across the world. So the 12 priests and DeSoto start to proselytize to Koski and said, I have a God that can make it rain. My God does miracles all the time. You should really look into my God. He's a cool guy. We can tell you about him. And Koski said, I believe you've been sent from heaven. I can't figure out any other reason why you're here. So I have the time. Tell me about your God and this Jesus that you talk about. So again, through translators, they start telling Koski about the different miracles that Jesus had performed and about salvation and what this would mean for his people. Koski brings up out of his group 2 people who are blind. He sends for them and brings them up to the priest and says, okay, you make it rain and you make these 2 guys see. We'll all be Christians right now. It's a lot of pressure to put on any kind of a preacher or a priest, just spur of the moment, please, cure these blind guys. And obviously these priests were not Jesus incarnate. They were just priests. So DeSoto did explain to Koski that it doesn't always work that way. We can't just, blink and make things happen. Our God doesn't work that way. But what we can do is we can have a mass, which is a Catholic church service, and we'll erect this big cross, which is the symbol of our religion. We'll pray to our God on your behalf. We'll see what we can do. Koski agrees. So they cut down a huge bald cypress tree, and right there on the top of the mound in the village of Koski, where the chief lived, they erected this huge thing. And archaeological evidence, incidentally, still shows the remains of that. National Geographic actually did a carbon date testing on it and a tree ring analysis just a couple years ago, and it comes back to when the DeSoto expedition was at Parkin. So it's fascinating scientific evidence to go with the historic. But I digress. So they erect this huge cross in the mound. The 12 priests lead a thrilling mass, which incidentally is the first Christian service west of the Mississippi in the Americas. And the very next day, it rained. Koski converted. He had everyone in the village to be Christians now. Now, do we really think that they knew exactly what that meant? Well, heck no. We start kids out in Sunday school, teaching them the ins and outs of religion and what you have to do to actually let Jesus be in your heart and to be saved. All of those things didn't happen, but you know what? Their God made it rain. We're Christian now. That's what Koski said. He started learning. The priests were just steadily inundating him with the different things that God and Jesus could do, the different ways that he could be a better Christian. And as he listens to this, he's a smart guy. He's a very smart guy. He starts realizing that there's something else that this Christian God can do for him that he has not been able to do for himself, and that is get revenge. Koski, who was learning all the different things that a good Christian should do and be, went up to the priests and said, priests, now that I'm a Christian and I understand the way things are, I feel really, really bad about how I've acted all these years. I have this enemy named Pekaha. Have you met him? No, we haven't met him, but we did meet some of his people. Yeah, he's just a kid. He's, 16, 18 years old, and it's really not his fault, all the things that happened in the past. And, I've sent people over there. I've done despicable things, at which point the priests kind of look at him and say, like the severed heads you have on the poles all around the village. Yeah, I feel bad about that. I didn't used to, but now that I'm a Christian, I feel like maybe I should go apologize. And, as long as I repent my sins and apologize, then Jesus forgives me, right? And they said, oh, yes, that's how it works. Yes, absolutely. We're so proud of you and your growth with Christ. He says, yes, okay. How about this? I feel like it would be better received if you and maybe some of your horses and metal and swords and things would take me and all of my warriors over there so we can personally apologize to Pekaha for all the things that we did in the past. Would you be willing to do that? So DeSoto and the priests are like, absolutely, this is great. Look at this progress we're making. And so they load up all of the warriors. But as we discussed earlier, when you're going to make peace or do anything politically, power-wise, you don't take the warriors, you take the women. Just like when he met DeSoto the first time, he took his mom, his sisters. This time he's taking all of his warriors, and they all happen to be wearing red paint. Doesn't occur to DeSoto because he's so proud of this new Christian convert he's got, and off they go marching to Pekaha. Well, when they come into the area that is the Pekaha region, which is north of modern-day West Memphis and Marion, the Pekaha people who are there just, working in the fields and making pottery and doing peaceful little things, they look up and they see, of course, DeSoto on horses. There were no horses in America. These horses had bright silver, shiny armor. There was no silver in America, no kind of metal like that. And then they see behind him hundreds of Koski warriors who are in full war paint and are running into town. The sight of this has the Pekaha tribe run and bail off in the Mississippi. And if you're not super familiar with the Mississippi, if you step off into it like around West Memphis or Marion, you're going to be in New Orleans in just a few hours. It moves pretty fast. It's very dangerous. Many of them drowned. Others were murdered while they were running in a panic all through town. The Koski warriors that weren't killing people were running into their holy places and desecrating them, looting all of their goods and burning things to the ground. Meanwhile, DeSoto and his guys are just shocked. What is happening? They're watching it unfold. They don't even act. They can't believe what they're seeing. We were supposed to be apologizing. We trusted you. So they're running around like mad, trying to round up the Koski people and say, the Pakaha people, don't run, we come in peace. And Pakaha's like, you're right. And so Koski, after they've done all these terrible things, they go running back to town, giggling all over themselves about what they've accomplished. DeSoto hangs out. They go to get the chief. This is a big deal. The chief is not happy. Like I said earlier, Chief Pakaha is 16, 18 years old. He's not quite a sub-adult. He's almost an adult, but he has heard stories his entire life about Koski, this 40-something-year-old guy with axe marks on his face that's fierce, that, don't ever venture too close to Koski land because they'll cut your head off and put it on a spike. Like, he was a horribly fierce guy, and the respect and the difference in age and just the fear had kept Pakaha from ever going inside Koski territory to, make any attempt to militarily or otherwise get rid of the threat. So even though they'd been at war all these times, for generations, it had been Koski leading the surge. So what Pakaha heard after this horrible attack on his village is the number of warriors that Koski had, which he was looking around at the number of warriors he had and realized he outnumbered him about 10-1. And he started thinking, respect and fear will only get you so far. Now that I know what your numbers are, I'm coming for you. And he was also similarly very unhappy, obviously, with DeSoto because he felt like he was in on it. DeSoto is nothing but apologetic because he also sees the numbers. He's been wiped out. Like, a third of his numbers were killed in Mississippi. So he's not in the mood to have all of these things happen. He was also unhappy with DeSoto because he felt like he was in on it. But DeSoto let him know that he had no intention of leading them in there to start anything except to apologize for their past behavior, which was egregious. And so he told Pakaha, he said, hey, I tell you what, I will escort you into Koski and you can do what you want. You can wipe them all out because you're right. I've been both places. You've got the numbers. I'm mad at them. I'm going to help you. Okay. So they start the march toward Koski. Koski, which has been impenetrable for generations. It has never, ever been assailed. Here they go. They get inside, and when they get to the village, before they can really see it, they hear it. They hear some kind of wailing and singing and lamenting is how it's described in the Chronicles. Thousands of people. Koski had called in everyone from all the neighboring villages, and not warriors, but women, children, regular elderly people, just your regular populace, and they were all singing some type of song, a mournful song. And Koski was on top of the mountain. He was addressing his entire people with the river to his back, saying, don't we all fall short of the glory of God? I am just a man. I messed up. Don't we all sin? I meant to go apologize. It went wrong. It went bad. But I've apologized to Jesus. He has forgiven me and washed me clean. Isn't that how that works? DeSoto. And DeSoto looks at Pakaha and goes, well, yeah, that's how that works. So you can't attack him anymore because Jesus said it's okay. He's forgiven him of it. And Pakaha is furious. He is like, I cannot believe this repeated insulting behavior. So things are very, very tense. And DeSoto, not knowing what else to do, says, how about this? We're going to have a dinner. Me, you, Koski, we're going to sit down. We're going to figure it all out. Okay, Pakaha says. So they do. They sit down at this table. Pakaha to his right because he has a better lineage. We don't really know the ins and outs of that, but that's just what is said in the Chronicles. And Koski on the left, they talk about how they're going to make friends and how they're going to live together. DeSoto is looking at this and he realizes the entire time this is never going to happen. This is a very bad and volatile situation. And so even though the dinner is set out for that purpose, DeSoto realizes that his time here is gone, that one or both sides are going to kill him and all of his men in the night, if not earlier. And so as soon as the dinner was over, DeSoto excuses himself, meets with all of his generals, and is like, we got to go. And they took off running out of Parkin, never to return.